If you're planning a trip to Europe in 2025, you can walk in the footsteps of the Anzacs. Our Western Front Explorer Tour spends 4 days exploring all the Australian battlefields from the First World War in the Somme, the Ypres Salient and Flanders. This is the only Australian tour that begins and ends in Paris, so it's a really great way to see those famous battlefields. Now, the Western Front Explorer Tour departs weekly between April and November, and it includes accommodation in the heart of the battlefields, deluxe transportation, and a range of extras that you only get on a Matt McLachlan tour. And like all our tours, you'll be escorted by one of our expert historians who will bring the story of the Anzacs to life. This itinerary has been personally designed by me, and all the historians are my friends and colleagues, and I've hand-picked them to lead these tours. This really is a brilliant way to see the battlefields. It's the 4-day Explorer Tour, departing weekly from Paris, and for more information, you can visit battlefields.com.au.
This episode is supported by Brex. Brex helps finance teams unlock their peak performance with the world's smartest corporate card, banking, expense management, and travel, all on one AI-powered platform. See why 30,000 companies across every stage of growth use Brex at brex.com/grow.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Peter Hart and I'm joined as ever with that trusty old bag carrier, as I like to think of him, Gary Bain. What have you got in your bag today, Gary?
Well, I've got lots because we're at my gaff today, Pete.
We are.
What are we doing today?
We're doing the rise of the Mahdi.
That's a northern word, isn't it? Mahdi bastard.
Yeah, you are. Anyway, you described this episode as dull as ditch water, I believe.
Well, I don't think it was quite that bad. I said it's not as ripping yarn-like as the previous ones.
But if we don't understand the background, Gary, we'll not know what's going on.
Well, one very good point you made just before we pressed record was that we've been speaking a lot about Egypt. But actually, the focus of these podcasts isn't Egypt at all, is it?
No, it's the Sudan. And it's how would you describe the Sudan then and now?
Dangerous.
Dangerous is one word. And some people might go for a hell on earth. And it seems to attract religious fundamentalists. And I don't care what sort of religious fundamentalists you're talking about. It's always a bad thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, extreme religious or political beliefs are inculcated.
That one of your words, is it, Gary?
By extreme oppression, corruption and mass human misery. You're mass human misery.
Yeah.
Then the Sudan was the ideal breeding ground for all of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's got a terrible history, one of Arab conquest and then successive incursions preying on the black indigenous African population. Some Arabs bred camels. What noise does a camel make?
Or kept cattle.
Oh,
Moo.
yeah. I was being distracted by the camels for a moment.
But there was also a thriving slave trade. Now, we should say at this point that there's going to be some unfortunate language and...
Yeah, as ever.
And descriptions of events that, to the modern ear, are quite distasteful.
Yeah, but we don't want to whitewash the terrible things that some British imperialists were capable of saying. That goes through all these podcasts, doesn't it? Now, where are we? So the Sudan is a patchwork of feuding Arab tribes. It's got a subservient underclass and no cohesive system of government. It's a wild country, a bit like the current state in the United States.
Yeah. Now, surrounded by hostile deserts and dense equatorial forests, it was difficult to conquer and for centuries was left to stew in its misery.
Then, 1821, that's a long time ago, Gary. Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt, makes a determined effort to overcome these obstacles, and he sends a strong expeditionary force to fight his way up the Nile. And he establishes a new administrative and government centre at Khartoum. Now, where's Khartoum? Put it on the map for us. We're not going to put any maps up. We can't be bothered, can we, Gary? Because they're on the internet. Where is Khartoum?
Well, it's at the junction of the Blue and White Niles. But this was all only the start, wasn't it?
Yeah, because over the years, the invaders push ever further to the south, taking control of the huge Kordofan, Darfur and Equatorial provinces. Well, does the Egyptian rule sort everything out? Does it become a land of milk and honey?
No, it makes things worse. Egypt itself was hardly a beacon of probity, but this paled into insignificance.
You swallowed a dictionary, Gary.
Compared to the rotten hotbed of extortion and wholesale corruption that resulted in the Sudan.
Now, the Pasha, the Pasha is the boss, if you like, of Egypt.
Yeah, he's later given the title of Khedive, isn't he, by the Turkish Sultan.
And the Turkish Sultan is his nominal boss, because Egypt is technically part of Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, to use its correct term. Now, he rules by means of the Sudan by means of an appointed Governor-General. And he, in turn, is meant to direct and control the governors of the various provinces. Is that clear to you, Gary?
Yeah, I was going to say he or she at that junction, but
you're in the realms of fantasy.
Yeah, but then I thought, hang on a minute. Now, as the Egyptian army was incapable of dominating or bringing order to the Sudan, the local administrative officials were far more interested in survival and lining their own pockets than delivering competent governance. Although Egypt paid lip service to abolishing the slave trade, her officials did little or nothing to stop the main culprits, who not only thrived but set up their own suzerainties, bastard, within the Sudanese borders. Awareness of the militant disapproval of the British government to any vestiges of the slave trade led the Khedive to appoint a British governor of the Equatorial Province as a fig leaf to avoid retribution.
Now, the first was a chap called Samuel Baker, and he's one of the Baker family, who are quite well known. And he was in 1874 succeeded in the post as Equatorial Province governor by Colonel Charles Gordon. Now, who's he?
He was a distinguished officer of the Royal Engineers.
So, technically, you'd imagine Royal Engineers got a brain.
Yeah. Perceiving the experiment to have been relatively successful, Gordon was appointed as the governor of the whole of the Sudan in 1877.
Now, he was born, Gordon, to a military family on the 28th of January 1833. Joins the Royal Engineers in 1852. Served with distinction in the Crimean War in 1855, and he also took part at the close of the Second Anglo-Chinese War. It's so good we did it twice. That was in 1860. 1863, he then gets one of these strange jobs that British soldiers used to get. What is it?
Well, he was appointed to command Chinese forces and performed brilliantly in saving the emperor from the Taiping rebels, rising to the local rank of general. Now, by the time of his return to Britain in 1865, he became known to the popular press as Chinese Gordon.
Great. Now, after a period of more humdrum duties, which obviously we can't be bothered to get, humdrum means Pete can't be bothered. He'd been plucked back from obscurity by the Khedive's call to the Sudan. He proved a dynamic governor, didn't he? He lambasted corrupt Egyptian officials. He attempted to stamp out the slave trade and generally tried to bring some sort, some degree, some bit, whatever word you like, of honest governance to that benighted country. Did it work?
Well, he had some impact in restricting the activities of slave traders, but he was unable to make any real progress against the endemic corruption and incompetence lurking in plain sight amongst his officials.
Yeah, the lack of any real authoritative direction or control from either the Khedive, that's the chap in Egypt, or the Turkish Sultan, the Ottoman Empire, left a power vacuum in the Sudan, which one man can't fill on his own, can he? It's not possible.
It's not. And in 1879, Gordon was further irritated when the Khedive Ismail Pasha was deposed and replaced by his son Tewfik Pasha.
Now, who was responsible for that? Was it the Egyptians?
No, this was done at the instigation of the British and French governments. And even though that was the case, Gordon felt he should have been consulted before such a drastic action was taken.
Now, first signs of some petulance in a way. In response to a combination of these pressures and his own ill health, he resigned as Sudan governor in 1879. Does the Sudan improve? Or what happens next?
Well, the Sudan soon reverted to its old ways under the far more laissez-faire suzerainty of his Egyptian replacement, Ralph Pasha. Are you going to laugh every time I say suzerainty?
Yes.
The slave traders resumed their evil trade without any real hindrance, and the poor and needy of the Sudan once again suffered unbearable cruelty and oppression. I suffer unbearable cruelty and oppression.
You do. Now, in one way, the brief interregnum to Gordon had given the masses, if you like, some hope of better days. But those hopes were crushed.
Yes, but then another saviour arose to offer the Sudanese masses hope built on their own efforts. Not the well-intentioned actions of a foreign Christian zealot like Gordon, imposed on them by the hated Egyptians even, but one of their own kith and kin, one sharing their Muslim religious backgrounds.
Ooh, well, who is this masked figure? Well, it's Muhammad Ahmed, and he has a whirlwind rise. It's amazing to behold. He was born in Dongola around about 1844. There's a lack of precision there. He was devoutly religious, devoutly. He studied the Islamic texts. He was tested about them as well by the foremost Sudanese scholars who tested him frequently. And he travelled widely, spreading the word, gaining a reputation as a powerful preacher, combining passion with an incendiary message from his trance-like visions that he was the chosen one. The prophesied Mahdi, that's the term that he was known as after this, who would be guided by God to secure the universal acceptance and dominance of the Islamic faith, bringing an era of justice and prosperity of all before going on to preside over the day of judgment, when most of them would be killed.
Now, it's difficult to judge the attraction of such a message to people who were utterly downtrodden and had nothing whatsoever to look forward to in their miserable lives. This offered a golden future and a place in heaven for those who fell in striving to achieve the Mahdi's vision. What did they have to lose?
Well, this is the thing, and he announces his status as the Mahdi publicly in May 1881. That's how close we're getting to 1882 when the Egyptian war breaks out. Now, the subsequent rise of the Mahdi, what does that remind you of? There's something that we've recently covered, well, a year or two, and something that should be in our mind. The rise of the Mahdi. What does it remind you of?
Well, it bears some comparison with the story of Napoleon's return from exile in 1815. Time and time again, he was threatened by larger forces, but he emerged stronger every time.
So on 11th of August 1881, the first clash occurs when a company of Egyptian troops, armed with Remington rifles, descend on the 300 barely armed supporters of the Mahdi that had gathered on Abba Island on the White Nile. What's the result?
Well, it was a shock as the sheer elan of the Mahdists overwhelmed the Egyptian troops. The Mahdi then avoided immediate retribution by retiring into the Nuba Mountains of South Kordofan. From there, spreading his messianic message, it's getting your teeth round it, and gaining recruits wherever he went. His strength grew rapidly.
Two more Egyptian companies follow him into the Kordofan, but they're also ambushed and they're destroyed at the Battle of Jabal Qadir on 9th of December 1881. these victories, it spreads, doesn't it? I mean, we don't know how, but word spreads rapidly.
And many of the local tribes joined the Mahdi's forces, known as the Ansar.
Now, we
soon were numbered in thousands.
We don't really call them Ansar. It's the correct technical name for it. It's a sort of army.
Well, it depends on what the question is. Then you might get an Ansar.
You've been planning that.
The local provincial governor of Kordofan, based at El Obeid, and the Sudan Governor General Rauf Pasha, I'm going to struggle with him, in Khartoum, began to realise that this was a serious threat to the status quo.
Now, in March 1882, remember when we're 18?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Some 3,500 Egyptian troops were dispatched from Khartoum to rendezvous with a force of about 2,000 Arab irregulars from El Obeid. And they pursue the Mahdist, the Mahdist host, or it's not a host yet, force. Host is later, into around the Nuba foothills. But it soon becomes apparent that they're not. It's not them that's pursuing. Who is it? What, eh?
I think what you're trying to say is that it soon becomes apparent that they're the victims as some 10,000 Mahdist forces overwhelmed their overnight defensive Zariba.
What's a Zariba?
It's
Remind them.
A defensive false area. It's basically a lager, isn't it?
Yeah, made up of it's normally mimosa thorn bushes, and it's prickly. Think of barbed wire, only natural.
You're prickly.
Yes, I believe
This further triumph was another multiplier. Volunteers flocked in, while the Mahdi forces became so dominant in the Kordofan that remaining doubtful local tribes had no choice but to throw their lot in with this new saviour.
What would happen to them if they didn't throw their lot in?
Well, have a guess. Meanwhile, the Egyptian government was being distracted first by the nationalist revolt by Colonel Ahmed Arabi.
We've done that, haven't we?
And then by the British retaliation with the Egyptian War of 1882. The resulting power lacuna was the ideal opportunity. It was not missed.
The Mahdi moved on to El Obeid, where, funnily enough, he has a major rebuff, a painful rebuff, Gary, because when he makes his initial attack on the 8th of September 1882, they're bashed back. They don't take the town. And what does he attribute this to?
Well, the crude frontal assault tactics employed, and he resolved in future to simply surround such well-defended localities, relying on starvation to deliver his enemies to him without heavy losses. And that would set the pattern for future operations, including the siege of Khartoum. Oh, spoiler. Now, as for the Egyptian forces, they were still in disarray. A relief expedition for El Obeid ended up being besieged itself at the town of Bara.
In January 1883, both Bara and El Obeid were starved out. What happened to the surviving soldiers?
Well, they were assimilated into the Ansar hosts and the leaders executed. Now, with El Obeid now serving as the Mahdi's capital, the huge provinces of Kordofan and most of Darfur had fallen to the rebellion. The word was spreading fast.
Now, after the Battle of Tel el-Kabir, the war in Egypt was over, and Tewfik Pasha, you know, the boss of Egypt, had regained his status as Khedive. And that's thanks to the British. What's happened to Arabi's army, the Egyptian army?
Well, Arabi's new Egyptian army had disintegrated.
No, his old army had disintegrated and they build a new one. You're getting confused, aren't you, Gary?
I am, especially as you told me to put new Egyptian army. Now, a start was made under British guidance in setting up a new Egyptian army, initially to be some 6,000 strong.
That's right, Gary, you've got everything right now.
I'm sure you'll edit all that out and I'll look a genius.
You will. Now, right. Why are the British setting up their own army in Egypt?
Well, if you think about it, this is in accordance with the long-standing policy of empires throughout history to maintain domination of a country by building up a local army under the control of the invaders.
Well, give me an example.
Well, India's the prime example I would have suggested.
Yeah. You're thinking that
Rome did it. Yeah, 2,000 years ago.
Great. And it's applied wholesale in Egypt, even though it's not technically or formally or in any way really part of the British Empire. but it's under British control.
Yeah. Now, on the 21st of December 1882, Major General Evelyn Wood was appointed as Sirdar.
Sirdar, I go for.
Sirdar or Sirdar?
I don't know. As usual, I don't know.
But, well, even though you don't know, feel free to correct me.
No, but I did feel free, Gary.
So he's appointed as Sirdar, or Commander-in-Chief of this reformatted army, which would be rebuilt from the bottom upwards.
You could do with rebuilding from the bottom upwards.
Now, to assist him, moving swiftly on, several British officers were dispatched to take control of the regiment.
This is like in India.
Given Egyptian ranks a grade or two higher than their British Army status. Now, Charles Watson was one of the Royal Engineer officers called back to Egypt. He would become Evelyn Wood's right-hand man and even stood in as Sirdar on occasion.
And this is what Major Charles Watson, Egyptian Army, says. My principal work is to look after the way in which the War Minister spends the money and keep a general eye over all matters of artillery stores, etc. I have had plenty to do already and find that I must speak Arabic. Just fancy, I was inspecting the clothing establishment today and had to discuss the new patterns of cloth with the director of it, a nice old gentleman who knew not a word of any European language. However, I managed to get along. I've seen lots of people and have discussed lots of things. On February 10th, there were held sports for the Egyptian artillery, the first time, I believe, that the Egyptian soldiers have had sports.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. The U.S. produces 13 million barrels of crude oil every day, enough to fill 800 Olympic swimming pools. But what is that oil used for? The gas we put in our cars is just the beginning. Nearly 50% of each barrel is refined into gasoline. Another 34% is refined into fuels like diesel and jet fuel. And the rest is used to make more than 96% of our everyday essentials, like the tennis shoes you wear, the cell phone you rely on, and medicines that help save lives. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our modern lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit ittakes.energy.com.
This goes out to all you finance folks. There's a lot of pressure these days to save money, and it's important. But the best finance leaders focus on more than that. Brex knows you want to drive growth, change the game, and ultimately win. And that's exactly what Brex will help you do. They offer the world's smartest corporate card, banking, expense management, and travel, all on one AI-powered platform. Brex unlocks your peak performance at every stage of growth. Startups love that Brex's high card limits and high-yield banking extend their runway. And larger companies love that Brex allows them to control spend before it happens, get every dollar to the right place, and automate finance busywork. More than 30,000 companies use Brex to make every dollar count toward their mission. Get the modern finance platform that works as hard as you do at brex.com/grow.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. Imagine waking up to find your bank account drained, bills for loans you never took out, a warrant for your arrest, all because someone stole your identity. Hackers aren't waiting. Why are you? That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Your personal data is a goldmine for hackers, and Aura helps lock it down. Aura monitors the dark web, blocks data brokers from selling your information, includes a VPN for private browsing, and a password manager to secure your accounts before criminals break in. For a limited time, Aura is offering our listeners a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and start protecting yourself and your loved ones. That's aura.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.
There was a good attendance, and everything went off satisfactorily. Several carriages were there with ladies from various harems who seemed to look on with much interest. Oh, I should think they must rather envy the freedom of European ladies, of whom there were many. Oh.
Now, another Royal Engineer recruited to the Egyptian army was Herbert Kitchener.
We've heard of him.
Who, in 1883, had finally escaped his service in Cyprus and had been posted as a captain to be second in command of the sole Egyptian cavalry regiment. He soon earned a reputation as a hard-working officer, determined to train his men to a very high standard.
And we will be hearing of him later on. Now, another of these British officers was Andrew Haggard. He was appointed as second in command of the newly reformed 4th Egyptian Battalion, where he identified a number of problems that had to be resolved before they could become effective officers. And you're going to tell us what Major Andrew Haggard, 4th Egyptian Battalion, says.
Our chief difficulty was, of course, at first the language, or rather the languages, in which we had to carry on our work. Our second difficulty was the drill, that is, to find out the best kind of drill to suit the Egyptians. As regards the former, we had to talk French to such of the officers as understood it, and to conduct all our correspondence in French and Arabic. Secondly, we had to deal with all the non-commissioned officers and soldiers in Arabic alone. And thirdly, the actual words of command, which we had to pick up ourselves before we could roll them off the chest in fine, sonorous tones to the soldiers. And that had to be in Turkish, of which the soldiers themselves understood just about as much as we did. To tell the truth, it was a very bastard Turkish that we used in those words of command, many of which we manufactured for ourselves as time went on. But still, the old non-commissioned officers and the officers from whom we learnt it, many of whom were half Turks and Circassians, understood what it was meant for, which was all that was wanted. As we all worked very hard from morning till night, and as the Egyptian has naturally a wonderful aptitude, or to be more accurate, a wonderful affection for drill, we very soon found things going along splendidly. Of course, we made some frightful mistakes to begin with, but that did not matter. All pioneers make mistakes.
Are we pioneers?
We are. We've been pioneers for a very long time.
When will we get better?
Now, it should be emphasised that not much could be achieved in a few months, but at least a start was made. Few could have imagined that in less than 20 years, these Egyptian army battalions would be front and centre in the victories achieved. That's another spoiler.
Yeah. Now, back in London, for the British government, the Sudan is an unwelcome sideshow. It's an Egyptian problem that was the responsibility of the hapless Khedive Tewfik to resolve. At this point, at this stage, the new Egyptian army was too small, too new, and at this point intended for service in Egypt only. And that's about as much use as a chocolate teapot for suppressing the huge Mahdist revolt going on in the Sudan. But something had to be done. Those words have sent so many British servicemen to their deaths.
What, chocolate teapot?
No, something has to be done.
Now, in desperation, Tewfik recalled some 10,000 of Arabi's former army to the colours for service in the Sudan. To secure a reassuring professional leadership, a number of British officers were recruited.
So let me say, they've reformed. Instead, this isn't the new Egyptian army. This is they've
basically reformed the old one. Now, foremost amongst these officers that were recalled was Colonel William Hicks, who'd retired from service in the Indian Army in 1880 after a long career, including service in the Indian Mutiny and on
he mutiny?
and on the staff for the Abyssinian expedition of 1867-68.
We do get about us British, don't we?
And he was now raised to the rank of Major General and appointed as Chief of Staff to the nominal Commander-in-Chief of the Sudan, Suleiman Niatzi Pasha.
Now, on his arrival at Khartoum, Hicks consulted with Lieutenant Colonel John Hamill Stewart. Who's he, Gary?
Well, he was a British intelligence officer who'd been sent out to assess the situation.
And what did he find?
Well, the outlook was certainly grim. Isolated as they were, with unreliable troops whose pay was often months adrift, faced by superior numbers of well-motivated opponents, and with a logistical incoherence plaguing anything they might try to do.
So, buggered.
Yeah, all going well.
Now, Hicks and the other British officers began, in a typically British manner, trying to drill the unwilling recruits. Remember, these are Arabians. I mean, these are the baddies in the Egyptian war, and this is only trying to get the unwilling recruits into some sort of disciplined formation that might stand a chance of holding firm and maintaining fire discipline against onrushing Mahdi forces, or dervishes as we're now going to call them, which is not good, but it's what everybody else calls them, in battle. The question was, and this, I can only think of Sharp here, would they stand I?
Now, Hicks plaintively requested the support of Evelyn Wood's new battalions, but this was refused out of hand. Hicks would have to make do with what he had.
They're not ready, are they?
No, and at first it seemed that, against the odds, Hicks might be successful.
No, Gary, you're in a world of fantasy.
In April 1883, he led some 5,000 men to try and clear the territory between the Blue and White Niles. He vengefully destroyed all evidence of the Mahdi's time on Abbott Island before fighting a battle with around 5,000 dervishes at the Battle of Marabia on the 29th of April.
Now, adapting a square formation, what's the advantage of a square formation, Gary? Just a reminder.
You have no exposed flanks.
Oh, yeah. And blessed by the presence of 2 machine guns, that probably helps.
That helps, yeah.
Hicks' forces managed to keep their nerve, and their firepower just flayed the dervish, onrushing dervishes, who are armed with, have they got machine guns?
Well, for the most part, it's spears and swords.
Yeah. Now, following this success, Hicks falls back to Khartoum to reorganise. He's unhappy with the perceived interference of his nominal commander. You'll remember that was Suleiman Niazi Pasha. The names may sound different from me and you, but neither of us know how any of these things are pronounced. Hicks threatened to resign. Oh, how petulant. But any impasse was resolved when his superior was made governor of East Sudan, and Hicks is promoted to overall command with the rank of lieutenant general, fast promotion.
Yeah.
Think he keeps it long?
Oh, I don't know. Possibly. Who knows? Now, also present in Khartoum was a 25-year-old young journalist and artist, Frank Power. Now, he'd only arrived that August, but was appalled by the sheer brutality and venality of the Egyptian regime that Hicks had to cope with. And this is Frank Power of the Times newspaper.
I'm not ashamed to say that I feel the greatest sympathy for them and every race that fights against the rules of pashas, bakshish, bribery, robbery and corruption. I pity Hicks. He is an able, good and energetic man, but he has to do with wretched Egyptians who take a pleasure in being incompetent, thwarting one, delaying and lying.
Now, on the 9th of September 1883, having gained command and emboldened by his success at Marabia, Hicks launched an ambitious expedition to reconquer El Obeid and the Kordofan province.
Now, he advances into the Kordofan province with what was gloriously called the Sudan Field Force, some 8,100 infantry, 900 cavalry and 300 gunners. They deploy 4 field guns, 10 mountain guns and 6 machine guns. And along with that is 2,000 camp followers, 5,500 camels and 500 horses.
You did so well to resist that.
Yeah.
Now, this was a major expedition in numbers, but the overall quality of the personnel was dire.
It is, and we want to make this quite clear, because what's going to happen, you might wonder why it happens, but the real reason is the thing we've said. They're badly motivated troops, badly trained, and the logistics are away with the fairies.
Now, Frank Powers accompanied Hicks, but a dreadful bout of dysentery reduced him from over 14 stone to only just 9 stone. And that caused him to be sent back from Dium to Khartoum. His bowels would save his life.
Have you thought of trying dysentery?
Well, I thought of my bowels saving my life.
Yeah. Now, Hicks and his army begin the long march to El Obeid from Dium. One of the journalists, because there's another couple of journalists with them, accompanying him, seems to have been aware, all too aware, I think is the expression, of their predicament. And you're going to be Edmund O'Donovan, who was writing for the Daily News.
You know, I am by this time, after an experience of many years, pretty well accustomed to dangers of most kinds, even some extra. Yet I assure you, I feel it terrible to face deadly peril far away from civilised ideas, and where no mercy is to be met with, in company with cravens that you expect to see run at every moment, and who will leave you behind to face the worst.
What made you think he was Australian?
Yeah, that wasn't Australian, that was common London.
Was it?
Yeah.
Now, Hicks' command It's not just this, it's every level, isn't it? Because there's disputes between the feuding British and Egyptian officers, that his men, they're not capable of doing anything but march in a clumsy square formation. Why can't they march in column and then form a square when they're under threat? Why can't they do that?
Well, they couldn't be guaranteed to quickly form square if they were attacked. They had to carry everything they needed, which meant a shortage of water soon became a desperate problem.
Morale, what was that like?
Poor, something which the Mahdi's agents played upon, infiltrating into the camp and spreading the word of his divine mission. Desertions were frequent.
Now, gradually, the Mahdi amassed his forces around Hicks' column, and as they grew in strength, they began to leech away the strength of the Sudan field force. Stragglers were picked off by dervish horsemen, while the overnight zareba, what was a zareba, can you remember?
Yeah, it's made mainly of
samosas?
Bushes.
You want to say samosas, don't you?
Prickly bushes, I'm going to say.
I was hoping you'd say samosas.
And they were harassed by rifle fire.
They were.
Now, at 10:30 on the 5th of November 1883, the Mahdi and his generals struck, having amassed a force of approximately 40,000 men. Well, the terrain, dotted with trees, had forced Hicks to divide his force into 3 squares, one leading the way, with the other 2 following on some 300 yards apart.
Now, under attack by hordes of determined warriors, the already demoralised infantry were helpless, and one by one the squares collapsed, and an orgy of killing begins. This is not funny. There are any European witnesses of this?
Well, we've only got an Arab boy leaving an account, because there's none. Yeah. So, and even this is anonymous, and this is that anonymous Arab boy. It was near noon. A rush, terrible and sudden, sweeping down like the torrent from the mountain, was made. The Arabs burst upon our front face in overwhelming numbers. It was swept away like chaff before the wind. Seeing this, the other sides of the square turned inwards and commenced a death-dealing fusillade, both on the Arabs pressing into the square and on each other crossways.
They've not thought it through, have they?
A terrible slaughter commenced. Hicks Pasha and the very few English officers left with him, seeing all hope of restoring order gone, spurred their horses and sprang out of the confused mass of wounded, dead and dying. These officers fired away their revolvers, clearing a space for themselves, till all their ammunition was expended. They killed many. They had got clear outside. They then took to their swords and fought till they fell. Hicks Pasha now alone remained. He kept them all at bay, but he was struck on the wrist with a sword, and he dropped his own. He then fell. I was covered with blood, and I got under a dead body and pretended to be dead, while the struggling and yelling, uproar, fighting and slaughtering was going on, as it did for 3 hours. They felt me and found I was alive. They pricked me with a spear. I was made a prisoner.
Now, one thing I'm slightly dubious about. You think about an account, and it's like Custer's last stand. Custer's the last to be killed. It's like...
Yeah, I know what you mean. And there may have been an element of the young Arab boy telling people what they wanted to hear, with Hicks being identified as the last fall. However, the intelligence officers gave credence to this account.
So, yeah, so the people he told it to. But as I say, I'm still slightly dubious about it. But it's all we've got, isn't it? And that's the thing. What we do know is it happened, because the bones of the force were in the desert. They got their rifles.
Yeah, it was estimated some 11,000 men were killed in half an hour of havoc, including Edmund O'Donovan. Now, only 300 were taken prisoner. Only 300.
When we wanted to call the book "Kill Them All," we some people thought we were being anti-British Empire, anti-British, but actually it's both sides behave in this reprehensible manner.
Meanwhile, back in Khartoum, the Europeans were aware that they were living in a tinderbox with little real support for their cause in the city. And once more, this is Frank Power of the Times.
It is now 32 days since Hicks Pasha and his immense army marched from Diom, where I left, and since then not one word, good or bad, has been heard of him or his 11,000 men. The word of mouth among the tribes travels quick as a telegraph, yet no news. When it comes, it must be good, as no such army has ever been seen before in these parts. If it is bad, we, Christians, Turks and Cairo Arabs here, will not have 10 minutes to live, as the Arabs here are to a man secretly for the Mahdi. Passing my windows, they called out to me, "Have you heard from your general yet?" Under the very nose of my guardroom, for at my gate I am master of the bodies and souls of a sergeant and 25 6-foot nigger regulars who turn out if I go in or out. Yep, sorry about that, but we're not going to pretend it doesn't happen.
I'm just wondering where those Arabs were from that passed under his window.
There's a wide variety of accents.
But the news of the massacre reached them soon enough. If that was not bad enough, it was followed by reports of a new seat of rebellion.
Yeah, in August 1883, a former slave trader, this is Osman Digma, and he took advantage of the chaos everywhere to foment revolt in the Suakin area. Now, that's a key port. Can you picture where the Red Sea comes? It's a port halfway down the Red Sea coast. Now, what do you think inspires Osman Digma?
I think I know where you're going. Whether he was inspired by a religious fervour or a desire to return to his former profession
Slave
is not
trader.
entirely clear. Yeah. But the revolt gained a ready traction amongst the Marshall East Coast tribes, particularly amongst the Hedendawa tribesmen.
I think they're the ones that are technically have been known as fuzzy wuzzies in certain racist accounts of the time.
Now, local successes enabled him to dominate much of the Red Sea coastal area outside the towns of Suakin and Sinkat.
Now, as ever, we can sort this out. They send a column of some 550 men to suppress the revolt, and that's accompanied by the local British consul. What was his name?
Lyndoch Moncrieff.
Oh. Who's he?
He's a veteran of the Zulu Wars, and he decided to go along for the experience.
Oh, that'd be interesting. On 4th of November 1883, this column of 550 men was ambushed at the hamlet of El Teb by a party of Hadendawa. They tried to form a square, but it collapsed under the savage onslaught. Many escaped, but Moncrieff was not one of them. Now, this triumph, what does it mean?
Well, it means a large number of Remingtons and copious amounts of ammunition fell into Osman Digma's hands.
So that means not just swords and spears from then on.
No, and as the flames of this secondary revolt begin to spread, the seat of government in Khartoum is now threatened on two fronts.
Now, Hicks had left the defence of Khartoum in the hands of one of his British officers, and this chap is, what's his name?
Oh, very British. Colonel Henry de Courtlogan.
Oh, fine old English name.
A recently retired officer who had served in the Indian Army. Now, on news of the disaster, he'd recalled garrisons from vulnerable outposts, concentrating what forces were left in Khartoum. Now, with him, he had the reporter Frank Power, who was asked to act as the British consul in the absence of any other candidates.
It just shows you that how just hand to mouth this is. Now, the endless work of trying to instill military discipline into what Egyptian troops they have, but they also set to work to strengthen the defences of Khartoum. Now, what do? Well, they order the construction of a formidable ditch and ramparts between the White Nile and Fort Buri next to the Blue Nile, so creating a sort of blocked off bit of it. It's like a peninsula, isn't it?
Yeah, they use considerable imagination to deny an easy approach to the rebels.
And this is
this is
Frank Power of the Times and now British consul. Does he have a posher voice now?
Oh, yeah.
We have paved the bottom of the ditch and side of the fortification with spearheads and have 100 yards of the ground in front strewn with iron crow's feet, things that have 3 short spikes up, however they are thrown. So they're
horrible.
What are they called? They've got a name. Anyway, bugger it. And then beyond, for 500 yards, broken bottles. You know, the Mahdi's men are all in their bare feet. Yeah. At intervals, we put tin biscuit boxes full of powder, nails and bullets at 2 feet underground with electric wires to them. So Monsieur the Rebel will have a mauvais quart d'heure before they get to the ditch.
A bad quarter of an hour.
Yeah, thanks. French is not my first language.
No, it's almost the same as British, isn't it? English even.
Yeah, I often think that.
Now, Colonel Henry de Courtlogan managed to amass a garrison of around 8,000 men, although many lacked military virtues.
Now, this brings it, they've got a lot in common with your time in the army, haven't they? Because what is the thing you'd say about you as a soldier?
I was excellent.
Did you lack military virtues?
I lacked everything. Now, he appealed to the Khedive for more troops to bolster the defences, but was denied in a peremptory fashion that enraged Powers.
This is Frank Powers. Power, not Powers. This morning, Colonel de Cote-Logan gets a telegram from the Khedive to say that he believes he cannot get together a column to relieve us, so we must depend on the neighbouring sheikhs for assistance. This is really rich, as the Khedive knows very well that there is not a sheikh in the Sudan who would or dare help us, and the fact of our sending to a tribe for help would confess our weakness and bring it down on us like 100 of bricks. I would have said ton of bricks.
Yeah, maybe at the time.
It wasn't different expressions.
It's different expression, yeah.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. Imagine waking up to find your bank account drained, bills for loans you never took out, a warrant for your arrest, all because someone stole your identity. Hackers aren't waiting. Why are you? That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Your personal data is a goldmine for hackers, and Aura helps lock it down. Aura monitors the dark web, blocks data brokers from selling your information, includes a VPN for private browsing, and a password manager to secure your accounts before criminals break in. For a limited time, Aura is offering our listeners a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and start protecting yourself and your loved ones. That's aura.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.
Now,
what's happening in London? What is happening?
At this stage, William Gladstone, a Liberal, you know.
You like Liberals.
Had no intention of Britain becoming embroiled in another colonial war by sending in troops. But the destruction of Hick's force left a dire situation in the Sudan, while the death of the British consul Moncrieff was a grievous embarrassment.
Do you mean you can't go around killing British consuls?
No, it's not nice, is it really? Now, the Mahdi was gaining power and influence at an exponential rate, and even Gladstone and his Liberal government, lovely Liberals, could not ignore the burgeoning threat to Egypt, and hence to the Suez Canal.
Now, we go back to our first episode. This is what really matters to the British, the Suez Canal.
But what were they to do?
I don't know.
Well, while Gladstone and his ministers pondered, the British press, as so often, knew exactly what should be done.
Now, it started innocently enough when the explorer Samuel Baker wrote a letter suggesting that the former Governor-General, Charles Gordon, should be sent back to sort things out. This was picked up by William Stead. Now, he's the pugnacious editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, another Liberal. He had developed a reputation for controversial press campaigns. Indeed, he has been cited as the precursor. Thank you, Gary. Precursor of modern tabloid journalism. Is he a scumbag then?
He was intrigued by Baker's proposal and he arranged for Gordon to be interviewed.
Now, some of the interview reflected the time-honoured concerns of British imperialists at the prospect of a victory by Muslim forces acting as a contagion across the world. Now, this is standard British policy at this time, because what religion are most of India?
Well, Islam. Yeah. And it continues, as you know, into the Gallipoli campaign in the Great War.
Absolutely.
Now, this is Major General Charles Gordon, and he says this. The danger to be feared is not that the Mahdi will march northward through Wadi Haifa. On the contrary, it is very improbable that he will ever go so far north. The danger is altogether of a different nature. It arises from the influence which the spectacle of a conquering Mohammedan power established close to your frontiers will exercise upon the population which you govern. In all the cities in Egypt, it will be felt that what the Mahdi has done, they may do, and as he has driven out the intruder and the infidel, they may do the same. Nor is it only England that has to face this danger. The success of the Mahdi has already excited dangerous fermentation in Arabia and Syria. I see it is proposed to fortify Wadi Haifa and prepare there to resist the Mahdi's attack. You might as well fortify against a fever. Contagion of that kind cannot be kept out by fortifications and garrisons. He got a bit emotional there because he was thinking about empire.
I can see. Now, the next portion of the interview, these are quotes from the interview, was clearly not read by Gladstone in view of what happens, because it's a clear exposition of what Gordon really thought, well, then, and it's not what the government policy was edging towards, which was the evacuation of the Sudan. That's where Gladstone's thinking. He doesn't want to be tied up. He wants to evacuate the Sudan back to Egypt. And what does Gordon say?
You have 6,000 men in Khartoum. What are you going to do with them? You have garrisons in Darfur, in Bar Ghazel and Gonda Koro. Are they to be sacrificed? Their only offence is their loyalty to their sovereign. For their fidelity, you are going to abandon them to their fate. How will you move your 6,000 men from Khartoum and all the Europeans in that city through the desert to Wadi Haifa? Where are you going to get the camels to take them away? Will the Mahdi supply them? If they are to escape with their lives, the garrison will not be allowed to leave with a coat on their backs. They will be plundered to the skin, and even then their lives may not be spared. Whatever you may decide about evacuation, you cannot evacuate because your army cannot be moved. You must either surrender absolutely to the Mahdi or defend Khartoum at all hazards. The latter is the only course which ought to be entertained. There is no serious difficulty about it. The Mahdi's forces will fall to pieces of themselves.
Wow, and that is the sort of British overconfidence and arrogance that... It's a naive ignorance of the scale of the danger posed by the Mahdi and his forces. He's not faced anything like that before, Gordon, has he? He'd been Governor-General, but this is a new threat. Now, the other thing is that Gordon himself is deeply religious, and he seeks to denigrate both the Mahdi's Islamic motives and the Islamic source of his power, doesn't he? Because it's foreign to him, because he's a Christian gentleman. What does he say?
I'm convinced that this is an entire mistake to regard the Mahdi as in any sense a religious leader. He personifies popular discontent. All the Sudanese are potential Mahdis, just as all the Egyptians are potential Arabis.
That's the Colonel
Arabi, yeah. The movement is not religious, but an outbreak of despair. So far from believing it impossible to make an arrangement with the Mahdi, I strongly suspect that he is a mere puppet put forward by Ilyas Zubair's father-in-law and the largest slave owner in Obeid, and that he has assumed a religious title to give colour to his defence of the popular rights.
Now that's just wrong. It's out and out wrong, and yeah. Then this is still the same interview with the Pall Mall Gazette. There's a reprise of his main theme, and that's the impossibility of evacuating Khartoum. Were the British government not reading this?
Clearly not. And this is once more Major General Charles Gordon. There is one subject on which I cannot imagine anyone can differ about. That is the impolicy of announcing our intention to evacuate Khartoum. Even if we were bound to do so, we should have said nothing about it. The moment it is known that we have given up the game, every man will go over to the Mahdi. All men worship the rising sun. The difficulties of evacuation will be enormously increased if, indeed, the withdrawal of our garrison is not rendered impossible.
Now, the press, the popular press, become enthused with the idea that Gordon is the only man capable of taking over the reins of power in the Sudan. It's also an easy solution. Now, who likes easy solutions? Let me see. Is that the military? No.
The government. So, Gladstone.
Yeah. Oh, he's a liberal.
He is. It was an easy solution, and it meant he could fall in with the press suggestions, appearing to have taken action without having to send out an expensive military expedition.
What could go wrong, Gary?
Well, if Gladstone had comprehended Gordon's published views, he would have had a very good idea. Gordon was a self-confident loose cannon of eccentric religious views, unwilling to fall in with the views of others, convinced that his way was the right way in all matters. He would follow his instincts, push his ethical opinions to the end, and seem to have no fear of death.
So what you're saying is if the Mahdi was a zealot, a religious zealot, then somebody else was?
Yes, so too was Gordon. But Gordon was right about the fundamental unsoundness of the adopted strategy of evacuating Khartoum. How exactly was it to be done? Yet still, he was to be sent out assisted only by Lieutenant Colonel John Hamill Stewart, who we heard of earlier, and this was a disaster waiting to happen.
Hang on, so he's the two-man expeditionary force?
Yes. What could possibly go wrong, to repeat what you said?
Yeah. Well, voices from Egypt, they had some idea of what could go wrong. And they also had an eye on Gordon as well. Now, the consul, remember the consul, he was appointed after the Egyptian war. That was Evelyn Bain. And he'd refused to consider Gordon earlier, feeling that sending such a demonstrative, loudmouth, that was my prejudice coming out there, Christian to Khartoum to face a religious Islamic movement led by the Mahdi would be counterproductive. He also feared Gordon's erratic changes of mind on any given subject. Not because he was persuaded, but because he would just think, well, this reminds me a lot of somebody in modern politics. Never mind.
Flip-flopping.
Flip-flopping, yeah.
And you're going to tell us
I am.
what Evelyn Bain says.
Gordon would be the best man if he will pledge himself to carry out the policy of withdrawing from the Sudan as quickly as possible, consistently with saving life. He must also fully understand that he must take his instructions from the British representative in Egypt and report to him. Who's the British representative in Egypt?
Evelyn Bain.
Yeah.
Now, Gladstone, he seemed to have shared these fears that Gordon would need some sort of control. And this is William Gladstone.
It has to be you, Gary, because you're a liberal.
He's a liberal, isn't he? The main point that strikes me is this. While his opinion on the Sudan may be of great value...
He's not Welsh!
Must we not be very careful in any instruction we give that he does not shift the centre of gravity as to political and military responsibility for that country? In brief, if he reports what should be done, he should not be the judge who should do it, nor ought he to commit us on that point by advice officially given.
Now,
that was high English, by the way.
Oh, really? It was dreadful. The problem is Gladstone is at fault here. There's a lot of people at fault here because Gladstone has strong opinions about what should be done. So does he brief Gordon? Does he hammer these points home to Gordon?
No, what he does is he leaves the briefing to a committee which is led by the Secretary of State for War, Lord Hartington. Now, as you say, in retrospect, this may have been a mistake, for after the briefings, there somehow remained a fatal ambiguity as to whether Gordon was to simply report on the situation in the Sudan, arrange to evacuate European civilians and the Egyptian troops garrisoning the Sudan, to negotiate a lasting settlement with the Mahdi, or by some unspecified means, secure a military victory over the Mahdi and his ever-increasing armies. Now, all but the first of these options were impossible from the start.
So you're saying that he could report on the situation in the Sudan?
Yeah, he could do, but nothing else.
Yeah, it's bloody madness, and everything that results is everybody's fault.
Yeah, and yet Gordon leaves London on the 18th of January 1884, and you're going to say what Major Charles Watson, you'll remember, of the Egyptian army, says.
On Wednesday morning, I went down with Sir Evelyn Wood, that's the Sir I remember, to Port Said to meet Gordon and to bring him up to Cairo. We got there about midnight, and he arrived from Brindisi the next morning with Colonel Stewart, that's the other member, that's the other 50% of the expeditionary force, who is going to the Sudan with him. As we had a steamer waiting for him and a special train from Ismailia, we got up to Cairo at 9 o'clock. We stopped with Sir Evelyn Wood. The next 2 days were fully occupied in getting things ready for him to start to the Sudan, and he left for Khartoum on Saturday evening. I am indeed glad he has come. It is the one hope for the Sudan. I have been wishing for it for the last year as things went from bad to worse. It was a great relief to me when he had really started. You can easily understand that Gordon looked better than I had seen him for a long time. So he's a knobhead as well.
One of the reception committee that met Gordon was Colonel Francis Grenfell, and he recorded his impressions, and I'm going to tell you what he said. He's also of the Egyptian Army, headquarters Egyptian Army. It was a strange and interesting man who, once seen, could not be forgotten. Short and spare, his hair tinged with grey, with a curious detached look in his blue eyes. His appearance was not of the earthy, but that of a communer with the unseen, as indeed he was. He lived in a world of his own, and practical business with him was almost impossible. The only orders he implicitly obeyed were those evolved by himself after consultation with his Bible. There's a very real undertone to that quote, isn't there?
He's saying he's a nutter.
Yes, basically.
Now, an old friend of Gordon's was Major General Gerald Graham, who we've heard from before in the Battle of Kassim, and he left us his memories of Gordon's meeting with the Khedive. Now, I find this extremely uncomfortable reading because there's a lot of arrogance on display from Gordon. He doesn't come across as a likeable character, and remember that Graham's his friend. So, Graham says this. After breakfast, Gordon sent for the Sultan and his brothers, treating them with civility, but as inferiors and with no ceremony, telling them to sit down and dismissing them when done with. He talked Arabic, utterly regardless of grammar, as he does French, but he rarely seems at a loss for a word. When he is, he refers to his interpreter, and he always seems to make himself understood. Gordon's telegram to Khartoum yesterday was, "Don't be panic-stricken, you are men, not women. I am coming."
Yes.
How's it going to end, Gary? How?
In a sign of the growing uncertainty, despite the oft-expressed reservations of Bain, Tewfik appointed Gordon as his Governor-General of the Sudan. Clearly, he was no longer just reporting back to the British government.
The confusion in aims and objectives is just proliferating between Gordon, the powers that be in London, and the powers that be in Cairo. It's just a recipe for disaster because he's facing a focused and formidable opponent in the Mahdi. It's just mad. Now, while in Cairo, Gordon met Zubair Pasha. Now, he's that old slave trader adversary. I mean, he'd been a big enemy of Gordon's. He'd been a powerful figure in the Sudan, but had been arrested. And he'd been held in Cairo. Now, although at times he'd been useful to the Khedive, Zubair had grown too powerful. That's why he was placed in detention. And he'd been in Cairo for the last 6 years. Now, what does Gordon conclude?
Well, he concludes that in the existing circumstances, the best that could be hoped for was to hand over power in Sudan to Zubair. Although still an unreconstructed advocate of slavery, Zubair had a strong existing power base in the Sudan, which Gordon hoped might counter the advance of the Mahdi. Despite their former enmity, Gordon considered that Zubair was a man they could do business with. Where have we heard that recently?
Well, Bain is reluctant about this because remember, the British Empire is the main bulwark against slavery, or they think they are, and he has a. Bain reluctantly falls in with Gordon's arguments, but who do you think might not?
Well, he certainly has a much more difficult time in convincing the politicians back in London.
Why?
Well, far from the intractable problem of the Sudan, but all too close to the outrage that would be expressed by the liberal politicians and newspapers, the powerful anti-slavery lobby and the British voters, the British government wavered for several months before eventually telling Bain in March 1884 that Zubair was simply not acceptable. Better a Sudan in flames than a return to the slavers.
What happens? Let's just, for once, do they get the Sudan in flames?
Well, with the Sudan policy still undecided, Gordon and Stewart set off... Oh, massive force. Gordon and Stewart set off for Khartoum on the 26th of January 1884. Their mission was hopeless from the start. They were just two men without the backing of the kind of strong British expeditionary force which might have given them a chance of successfully evacuating Khartoum.
Now, with the existing relatively small garrison of poorly trained Egyptian troops that they would command in Khartoum itself, they're going to be lucky to survive. And Gerald Graham never forgot his last parting with Gordon at a place called Korosko on the Nile on 2nd of February.
Or is that Korosko?
Yes, I think you might be right, you know. But this is what Major General Gerald Graham says, and it's quite a sad little quote. "The place where I last saw Gordon is wild and desolate. The desert there is covered with a series of volcanic hills, nothing between the hills but black basins or ravines, dry, dark and destitute of all vegetation, looking like separate entrances to the pit where those who entered might leave hope behind. I climbed up the highest of these hills and through a glass watched Gordon and the small caravan as his camels threaded their way along a sandy valley, hoping that he would turn round and that I might give him one more sign. But he rode on until he turned the dark side of one of the hills, and I saw him no more. Sadly, we returned to our steamer, and I felt a gloomy foreboding that I should never see Gordon again."
And he never did.
He never did. He never did. And I hope you're enjoying this. I hope if you do enjoy it, you will... The best thing you could do... What's the best thing they could do to help out a poor starving author?
Well, they could buy your book, Chain of Fire, which is available in all good bookshops.
Or on our sum up page, which we will print a link for. And thank you for listening. I hope you haven't found that too dull. We have to set the scene.
It's important to give the background to what's happening on a global scale.
Global? Cheers.
Global.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us,
blah,
you can now buy us a coffee.
blah,
Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. By the time you hear about a data breach, your information has already been exposed for months. On average, companies take 277 days to report a breach. That's 9 months where hackers have access to your personal data. That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Aura is an all-in-one digital safety solution that monitors the dark web for your phone number, email, and social security number, sending real-time alerts if your info is found. It also includes a VPN, password manager, and data broker removal to help keep you safe. For a limited time, Aura is offering a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and protect your loved ones. That's AURA.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.